Hello gamers, I am back again and this week we have more updates to Civ 7, new information released after a dev Q&A earlier last week. So I shall be going through all of the new information that was released and how this both answers the questions that we have as of recently, but also introduces new questions about the upcoming game. So let's start with the new leader that was introduced, Queen Himiko for Japan, someone who focuses on diplomacy and friendship. And then within that sort of releasing the look of Japan, they kind of gave an explanation as to how the changing civs would work. Moving from sort of ancient Japan through up until Meiji Japan in the exploration or modern age, meaning these transitions may actually have more historical consistency than previously thought, which does sort of alleviate some of the fears we had initially when this idea was first announced. And obviously, also when it comes to the other choices, they are based on historical, geographical, and gameplay based decisions. So it's not entirely random. It is based on the way you play the game. It is also based on who you are as a civ historically. So that does for me alleviate some of the fears, meaning that you have the option to play the more historical, more immersive storytelling route, which I think it's good to have the option to do it, whilst also still having the option to go on other routes. What they also showed was that there are three Indias, the Maurya India, Chola India, and Mughal India, in that order, of course, with Ashoka of India being the leader. The transition of Rome goes from the Romans to the Normans to the French, and you start as either Napoleon or Augustus. So those are obviously three more civs being introduced into the game. And they talked a lot about the AI and how the AI will always choose the historical pathway if it is available to them. So that helps a lot in sort of the idea of storytelling that that us as the player are the ones telling the story and the AI will follow the historical path. And I think that is all good information because it is telling us that they are going that even though it is still a big change, they are still making it somewhat historical and somewhat immersive. Now, they also talked about how the whole idea of how these changing civs affects the way like buildings and cities change. And so there were going to be specific districts and buildings for specific civs that remain there over time, and specialists from Civ 5 are returning, and you have specialist and unique buildings in that district that remains over time. You may just build around it. Now, settlement caps are something that we knew about before, but were kind of re-explored in this. And I believe certain civilizations may have different settlement caps, and but that settlement cap can be increased through, I'm assuming, like research or something, or through buildings. Now, the going back to the unique buildings things, the buildings are kept the same, but the unique buildings, but the Norman sort of style buildings are added together with these sort of buildings, and your policy tree that your leader has keeps some Roman traits available throughout the game. So there's a lot there that's really help sort of the really sort of make the immersion of that and make the transition better. I think a lot of this is really helping to stir back confidence in the game, and that they are going to give us that sort of historical immersion route, whilst also allowing for a bit more exploration. And I think still my thought is going to be it is going to be all about exploring it when the game eventually releases or in sort of future gameplay releases of the game. So I think we kind of still need to wait and see fully before we make any true judgments on this. So, what's next talked about was the art style and the map. So the realism in the art style is going to be a lot based on a lot of what was in Civ 5. And if you've seen in some of the clips, they have the sort of hexagonal sort of fog of war that is revealed over time. And it looks good. Like the game itself looks fantastic. They seem to be using a lot of things like miniatures and painted landscapes. So it's all going to be quite realistic and bringing it back to that look of Civ 5 that was incredibly popular. Now, the map apparently might expand, so it might start off pretty small, but then get bigger and bigger as the ages go on. Kind of, I guess, in line with that sort of layers of history. As history went on, more and more of the world was discovered. And looks like fortifications have been reworked, so they may be more permanent structures that grant a lot more benefits. So that is all just normal stuff that I like to know, and it's also based on what we've seen, even if that's not the final version. The game looks good, and I think that this art style actually might be much, much better for Civilization than the sort of Civilization 6 more sort of fantastical, sort of, I guess, CGI look it kind of had, but I still think it's going to be one of those things that we have to wait until the game fully releases to see. Now, there was one thing that came up that, or has come up recently, that is causing a bit of problems, which is the use of Denuvo. Denuvo is basically one of those anti-piracy softwares that has allegedly caused a lot of performance issues and punishing people who have legitimately purchased the game. I don't have any anti-piracy stuff. I don't pirate games. I don't have any anti-piracy stuff in any of the games I own. So I've never had to experience any of this, but I imagine that them using that could be potentially damaging. And I'm seeing a lot of people, a lot in the comments of other videos talking about it online, about it is quite a controversial move. So I think we'll have to see what happens on the release and obviously in the lead up to see whether or not they decide to continue with that. And I'm all for trying to remove anti-piracy, but I think there are better ways to do it. I also think maybe, people just have to understand that this game, we've been waiting for it for like over 10 years. It's expensive. So obviously we've talked about a lot of things, including like the changings of civs may be more historically accurate, but there's still some more questions of how this works, such as the aesthetic, how do cities change, how does that fit in? And then one of the things they said was when a city is captured, it changes its architecture to match the conquering civ, but then how does that fit in with the changing civs? Which is all of the stuff that they kind of answered with their talk about the sort of the buildings and how the civ changing works. But I still think those questions need to be answered, but will only get answered in gameplay. So we need gameplay to really understand anything like that. When so they talked about multiplayer. No hot seat is available currently. Now I love playing hot seat. I love being able to play as multiple civilizations at once. Love playing with my family. So I'm a little bit annoyed at that because I would like to be able to do a lot of things at once. I don't know why, but it's a lot of fun. That's the one thing I'm currently like actually annoyed about. Because if there is going to be no hot seat available, then I'll be very annoyed because I won't get to have my fun or as much fun as I would. Depending on the system, multiplayer may be capped at a certain number of players, which I think is fine. I mean, if it's upwards of 8, I think if the cap's like 6 or 8 players, then I think that's fine. Multiplayer is kind of been made more manageable by the sort of ages system because, you can say play one age of the Antiquity Age one weekend and the Exploration Age, and I think I do admit that's a very good system. And that I think that's also part of how it works. And a question I had last time I talked about it was, does this mean that these ages are going to be longer? And I believe they said that the number was about 200 turns for the Antiquity Age, which I think is the right move to make. If you want a game to last as long as a normal game of Civ 6, but with 3 ages, each of the ages needs to be longer. And obviously they can make the end ones a bit longer to sort of encapsulate more of the time. So yeah, I'm glad that they have cleared that up. Now, the other thing they talked about was the rumors about DLCs. And something that came up was sort of are ages going, and this is a lot of rumors, that none of this is necessarily confirmed, and obviously a lot of this isn't going to really start happening until after the game's release. Ages as DLCs. Could we get a DLC or a game or like a later update that is giving us either an alternate age to sort of something like millennia, where it's an alternate age to like the exploration of modern age, or an entirely new age in between those two that maybe doesn't have a Civ change. I think that one's less likely. I feel like it's more likely to be just an alternate age to either exploration or modern. But I also don't think that they necessarily do that. I don't think that Civ is the kind of game to do that. And in similar to Civ 6, I reckon we're going to get some like game modes and leaders and civs as DLCs. And in that dev meeting, they did talk about how they are leading into the community. So maybe we'll see a lot more of the modding community brought in to, or like the modding community to give advice on what leaders to add. Because I think there's a lot of potential leaders that they've sort of missed out on adding that they could definitely add in here. And if they're going for that whole idea of sort of building history and layers, there's a lot of interesting routes they could go. So obviously DLCs are going to have to wait until, I would say, at least at least 6 months after the release of the game to really decide what they're going to do. So yeah, there's a lot of information here. A lot of it has answered questions we've had before. There's a lot of still new questions, and there's a bit of stuff that I'm not sure about. But I think the more information we find out, the better it's going to seem. And also, we have to remember that until the game actually releases, all of this is just speculation. We can only know so much. So I think we have to take that into consideration when we're doing any of this. So that is all for this weekend's update on Civ 7. I know there is going to be another gaming live stream coming up in, I believe, next weekend. So I will try and get something out to discuss all the information revealed in that. But other than that, thank you all for watching, and I will see you all soon.